Hello and welcome back to PolyToots. In today's lesson we are going to be exporting this thing and getting it into Unity, doing animations, particles, all that good stuff. So we need to get this out of 3D Coat, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to the file menu and choose export objects and textures. And then up here for the mesh, if you just choose a location for the mesh and the mesh type, I'm just going to use an OBJ. And I'm going to throw it all in a folder, so all of the textures as well as the mesh will be exported into this one place. We don't need to worry about the metalness, roughness stuff because we didn't actually paint with any of that anyway, so yeah, we can ignore that for this one. I'm going to change my preset type here to the Unity standard just to speed things up a bit, but I'll keep the albedo as it is now as a TGA, and that's because we are going to need the alpha channel for the chain that we did. But we'll get rid of the stuff that we don't need, like, you know, height and occlusion and whatever else. Essentially all we need from this is the albedo, the normal, and the emissive on the base. And I'm going to set my emissive and normal maps to PNGs because I don't need any alpha channel information in those. And once that's done, you just hit that OK button. And now one thing to note is that this has exported the albedo texture with the glow kind of already on it. So I'm going to turn the glow layer off, and then I'm just going to come up here to the textures window, and I'm just going to export the albedo, and then I'm going to override it with the base albedo that we just exported, which might seem a bit strange, but we already have the emissive map for it. That's the green glow. But when we turn the glow off in engine, we don't want the green to still be there. So I'm doing another export without any of the glow. So here in 3ds Max, you can use whatever you want. All I'm going to be doing is just attaching things together. I'm just going to be importing this mesh, and I'll leave all that as default. And I'm just going to change my wireframe color just because I hate it when it all comes in with different colored wires. Also, it seems to come in with a bunch of shininess on it, so I always just open up the material editor and get rid of that. And I'll also crank up the color to 100 just to make it easier just to look around so there's no lighting information. But yeah, as I say, this step could easily be done in Blender or whatever else. I'm just attaching things together and then moving the pivot points to where I need them. And then also for this piece, I did say that I was going to duplicate it and then put it at the back, and so that's what I'm doing here. And I do also scale in the verts a little bit just so it fits a bit more comfortably. So yeah, there's not much to this. I'm just attaching things. So the base is one object, the lid is one object, and the flipper things need to be detached into their own separate pieces. And the locking pipes on the front also need to be attached into their separate pieces so that we can move this stuff around inside Unity. And so here, as an example, just moving the pivot point of this lid just so I can rotate it. We can actually do this within Unity itself with an empty game object, but while we're here, we might as well do it. So yeah, as you can see, after I've split the flipper bits up into their separate objects, I'm just coming along now and moving the pivot point. So the hinge here will rotate about this axis, same for the other side. And then the actual raised platforms will rotate around where that hinge meets. And then I'll link this all together so it all makes sense. So there's no bones or skinning or anything. Everything's just linked in a hierarchy. So, you know, one object is a child of another. And because this isn't strictly a 3ds Max tutorial, like, I'm not going in depth as to how you would do this. It's pretty simple stuff. Like, if you use any other package, I'm assuming that you probably know how to do this kind of stuff. But if you don't, let me know. I don't think I have any tutorials on 3ds Max, and I've been using it for a very long time, so I'm sure I can help out with whatever. So now I'm just going to fold the flipper objects down, and I'll place it inside the chest to see if it actually fits, because this was made a bit blind, so I'm probably a little bit out. I mean, I already know that I am, so I don't know why I'm wording it like that. I am a little bit out. So what I ended up doing was actually just moving the hinges ever so slightly because, you know, I can move them a touch. Not too much, but a bit. And then I just scale in the middle portion, and everything else will scale with it because they're all parented to the like the main platform itself. In fact, I think I actually moved the hinges back. So what I said before actually about moving the hinges in a little bit, yeah, I see here that I did actually keep them where they were, and I just scaled the whole object down. And then I did have a tiny bit of mesh poking out the bottom. We probably wouldn't have ever seen it in the game, but I just decided to move those birds up anyway. And that's pretty much it. It is good to be exported. So just select everything or however else you do it and export that whole thing out. And I'll be doing this as an FBX this time. Just with pretty standard stuff like no animation. Because 3ds Max is weird, I'll be using the Y equals up axis, just so it actually comes into Unity the right way. Okay, so now we're finally inside Unity. I'm just going to make a new folder here and just basically dump everything into it. So I'm just going to right click and import assets, or you can just drag and drop if you want, but I already had everything here, so it was all good. I'm going to select everything except for the original OBJ, and there's also some textures that we don't need to bring in, like the emissive map for the chain object, because that doesn't have any emission. So the first thing you probably want to do is just swap your normal maps over so that Unity actually knows that they are normal maps. And then there's our object, so we can just go ahead and drag that into our scene. And from here, I have noticed there's a weird geometry glitch on the back there. It's probably the normals of the mesh. We could go back into Max and fix that, but Unity has a way to fix it, so we'll cover that in a second. But for now, I'm just going to change my environment a bit because I don't want to use PBR lighting. So I'm going to drop the skybox and I'm going to just change the color of the lighting to white. And then to fix up these bits on the back that for some reason are just a bit darker, I'm going to tell Unity to actually calculate the normals rather than relying on the import, and as you can see there, they fix up just nicely. And so now I'm just going through my mesh, making sure that everything is correct, because the way that we're going to be animating this is pretty old school. We're basically just going to be grabbing things, moving along a timeline and rotating them and moving them around. And I know there that my hinge was actually slightly offset, but I fixed that in an edit, so you don't have to worry about that. So now a completely optional step, but I'm just going to make a quick shader here using Amplify Shader Editor, and the main reason for this is just because by default it comes with a nice outline. I will include some links in the description for how to achieve something similar with Shader Graph. It's from the AE Tuts guy, so yeah, it's not my own stuff, but still top quality content. So yeah, I'll probably speed through a bit of this. It's a very, very simple shader, just 3 textures. There's going to be a diffuse, your normal map, and your emissive map. And then I'm going to have metalness and smoothness, and then a value multiplied with my emissive texture, just so that I can control the power of it. And then lastly, enabling the actual outline in the amplify options here. And by ticking that box and enabling it, it will actually appear in the material inspector. So that's why you don't see it anymore on the actual material graph, or whatever it is you would call that thing. There used to be a thing where you could basically plug in your own floats and stuff, but now you don't need to. So yeah, once that's done, if you are using your own shader, obviously create a material from it and, you know, throw in your textures. As I say, this is completely optional. You can do this with a standard material. The only thing that you won't have is the outline, but that's pretty much all I'm using this for anyway, because in terms of, you know, fancy rendering, it's pretty almost self-lit. You know, it's just being lit by a white light in the environment. So yeah, you can use shader graph if you want, or just use a standard material. Like, it's completely up to you. And so yeah, just lastly, this is where I am hooking in the float value to control the power of the emission, but that's pretty much it. And so now we can control the power of our emission, which again, you still can do on a default material, so you know, that's okay. But while we're here, we might as well use the post-process effects that come with Unity, or at least you have to get them from the package manager. Just to make the bloom basically come out and shine. I already have one for bloom, so I'll just use that. And every time here that it says, you know, don't use the layer everything or default, if I'm just trying to test some stuff, then I will. Otherwise, you should probably heed that advice and stick these things in their own layer. But we can ignore all of that stuff for now, because we're just basically playing around with this thing just to see how it looks. So there we are. It's just, you know, some nice bloom. You can see what it would look like without it, so definitely, you know, a nice shine. And so I'm just going to save my scene real quick. I didn't need to include this in the recording, but apparently I did, and so now I am going to talk about it. Here I am saving my scene. Fascinating. Okay, so now let's actually start to look at the animation window, and you can access this by going up the window and then into animation, I think, or you can just hit Control-6 on your keyboard and that will open it up. And this is the timeline that we will be using, but first of all, I did just notice that we haven't done anything with the chain object. So at the moment, it's just using whatever default embedded material that it was on when we imported it. So I am just going to quickly make a standard material for this. We don't need our own shader for it. It certainly doesn't need an outline, like it's way too small. So yeah, standard Unity material, and I'll just throw on my textures and I'll set the rendering mode to cutout. So that will actually be transparent. I think cutout is by far the cheapest transparent rendering mode that you can use. So anytime that you can use it, please do. And that's pretty much it. We didn't really do much in the ways of texture on this. It's way too small for me to really care about. No one's going to be able to see up close to it. I will just rotate the light a bit because it does have a normal map. So if I just do that, we can have a look at it now. You can see that, you know, there is some shape to it. It's not just completely flat. Oh, I mean, technically it is, but you know what I mean. Okay, so now we are actually ready to start animating. And so we already have our animation window open. So if we select our root object that we want to animate, it will let us know that there's no animation for this, so we can create one. And we can just click that button, save out an anim file, and it will automatically create a animation controller, and it will also assign that to your object. So you don't have to worry about that. You can just click that create button, enter a name, and you're good to start going. You may have noticed that there is the ability to kind of scale this timeline, and that's if you just use the Alt button and right click, I think. So Alt, right click and drag, and that will allow you to kind of scale time. I say scale time, it's not scaling time itself, it's just scaling the view. But then there's this record button up here, and this is where the magic happens. Essentially what this means is if you hit this record button and then scale across in the timeline and then move something, it will just move and enter a keyframe. It will automatically put a keyframe at frame 0 for where it was, which is handy. So I'm just starting off with, I don't know, maybe like half a second or a second or something like that into the animation, and then I've just grabbed these pipes and I've just moved them inside this lock bit. And then if you preview, you can actually see them moving in. And so that's pretty much it. You can do the same with anything. So now just opening the lid, and you can see there that it does create that initial keyframe at the beginning. And so I'm going to move that because I don't want the lid to open immediately. I want it to kind of wait a bit. So I'm just moving it, and you can see that the lid kind of stays put now until those pipes have been moved out of the way. And that's kind of it, to be honest. I mean, there's not really much to teach for this one. So it's just a case of animating things how you want them to animate. And the reason that I prefer to do this stuff within Unity, although it does have its drawbacks, it's mostly because if I ever need to change something, you know, like if this lid had to open slower, or we decided that it should have more of like a kickback once it's opened, it's just so much quicker for me to do it within Unity itself than have to go back into Max, change the animation, export it back into Unity. So that's why I prefer to do things like this within Unity itself. But as I say, it does have its drawbacks. Like if you wanted to export this animation for use somewhere else, you know, let's say that you were using Unity, but then your studio just decided that the game had to be made in Unreal or something instead. You would lose basically these animations that you've done. You wouldn't be able to port them over unless someone out there has a plugin for that, which is, you know, maybe. So yeah, back to what's happening on screen. Basically just the same as I was doing before, rotating things, moving things. It creates keyframes. I move those keyframes around as I need to. I'm always previewing the animation to see kind of how fast or how slow something is, and then making sure that things are in time with each other as well, because you don't necessarily want everything to happen like after the other, you know, like the locks come down, the lid opens, the platforms come out, and then the side platforms pop out. Like you want some of it to be happening almost at the same time, like there's a bit of an overlap. So managing your keyframes like this can be a little bit confusing, I suppose, or tedious, but there is that whole list on the left which lets you know what it is you are animating, like which objects have keyframes. So that makes it a bit easier. I think I haven't really ever had too much of an issue with this. And of course, like with like any other keyframe animation type thing, if you wanted to do a hold but have the animation still play, then you just copy one keyframe and then paste it somewhere else, and then it will actually, you know, hold there. Now the only thing left to animate on this is the glow, and you'll notice that if you select the material, go to wherever you want in the timeline, and then try to change a property, in this case it's the emissive power, you'll notice that no keyframe is made. There's just nothing registering up there, and that's because we're trying to modify the material here on its own, which isn't going to work. Instead, you have to select the object that the material is on. So in this case, our glow is on the lid, and so we need to select the lid, and from there we can see the material listed, and here we can change the property while we're in the record mode, and you'll see here that it even turns red to let you know that it's an animated value now. And we can see up here that the keyframe has been added in, so we can just go ahead and play with that until we get something that we like. So for the animation, that's probably it. I think, you know, it's quite nice, and it's okay for, you know, like 10 minutes work or something. So lastly, I am just going to do like a quick particle system for this. I know that technically the red loot box in the game doesn't have particle systems. I think only the golden one does. But this isn't an exact copy of the red one anyway, and you know, it's okay to just have a little something extra. So the way that I'm going to start this is I'm going to right click on my root object here, and we're just going to create an empty object. This will just be a container, so I'm just going to call this effects. And then within this, I will create the particle system. And as a bit of a pro tip, make sure you turn off the selection outline, which you can find in the gizmo window. By default, I think it's on, and it makes working with particles just impossible, or well, not impossible, but really annoying. So I always make sure to turn that off. Okay, so first off, I'm just scrolling through my materials here, and I just want to see if I have something, you know, something along the lines of smoke. And I'm going to use edge emission, and then I'm going to come into an orthographic mode here just to be able to place it a bit more accurately. And I'll just change the duration down to like 1 second or something like that, and the speed down to 0, because I'm going to control its movement with this velocity over lifetime, which is just, you know, it's a bit easier. It allows me to control the speed but also the direction. And then, you know, I'll play about with the size of the things, and also their starting rotation, which is almost always a random between two constants, and I tend to do 0 between 3, 4, 5. And also for the size, we do want these to be small as they come out, because it's supposed to be the pressure. And so if you just enable the size over lifetime, then by default it is actually already on the correct one, so that's cool. And then yeah, play with the emission amount, try to get something that you like. Color over lifetime is pretty important. Make sure you kind of alpha out that end. But then one tip is to put down another point and move that along to like 70 or 80% or something like that, and still keep that on full white. That way your particles don't start to fade too soon. And that's kind of it. It's basically now just a case of tweaking the speeds of things and the sizes. And then after I'm happy, I'll just duplicate this same particle system around. So I'll put one on the back and then 2 on the sides. And I'll just change the emission amount accordingly, because obviously the sides don't need to be as long, and therefore they don't need to spew out as many particles. And then also I just decide here to angle them down. I think that makes it look a bit more interesting rather than coming straight out. I do also decide to change the color, and I'm not sure why I went with a green, but that's what I went with. If you've seen my my Twitter post, then you would have already seen that I changed this back to white. But yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. I guess maybe the light was shining on my monitor or something at the time. And then lastly, we can turn off the looping animation for this because we do just want it to kind of pressurize out. And then what we can do is we can start recording our animation again, like on the actual timeline, and we can just select that root effects layer, make sure that it's turned on at the start, and then what will happen once we play the game is it will automatically play the particles. They won't loop, so it'll be fine. And then what I'll actually do is I will also turn it off at the end, by which I mean I will actually disable the effects object at the end of the animation, which you might think is a bit pointless considering it's not a looping animation, but I'm pretty sure if you don't enable it and then disable it at the end, when it loops the animation, it will only play the particle system once, whereas you want it to play every time that this lid opens. And so I'll just give it a quick preview here. Yeah, I mean that's okay, aside from the fact that I decided to do it green, but not bad. Lastly, I'm just going to drag this whole root object down into my project just so it creates a prefab. And so now that is basically its own little contained object which contains, you know, all of the animation, particle systems, the correct material. Pretty handy, you know, like if you were working on an actual game, this would be what you would actually use rather than having to remake everything all the time. And that is pretty much the end of the tutorial. I mean, not pretty much the end of the tutorial. I think that is the end. It took us a while to get here, and that is my fault. I should have known that work was going to be pretty busy and the weather was going to get pretty hot, and I probably shouldn't have decided to do like a whole asset series again, but you know, it is what it is, and it's all finished now. Yeah, so thank you very much for watching. I'll be moving back onto doing some shader stuff soon, but yeah, that's it for now. I hope this has been of use to someone out there. And yeah, let me know if there's anything that you want to see modeled from a game. Otherwise, you know, I'll pick whatever it is that I'm playing at the current time. I think I'm in danger of rambling on again, so I will just say goodbye. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.